Joined now by Brian Stelter of CNN fame. He is the author of the brand new book, Hoax. Brian, you're at the top of the Hugh Hewitt book pile. Good morning and welcome to the Hugh Hewitt Show.
Good morning. I'm glad to be on the pile at all. Thank you.
Well, these are the last 12 books I've done. I actually put it there because I do authors frequently, and you're pretty mean to talk radio and Hoax. I just wanted to point out to you, some of us read books and interview authors, and you ought to at least give us a shout out and Hoax occasionally for doing the work of the Lord.
Well, I think you're suggesting I should do an entirely new book. Maybe the next book should be all about talk radio.
I
But
think
what's
that
the
would be
story?
a great choice.
What's the story of
Br-
talk radio?
Brian, let me begin by telling people I got to do all my disclosures. Brian Stelter is an acquaintance and a friend from CNN. We shared a ride on the Acela once. I don't think I've ever been on your show, but I've done so many hits over my many years in broadcast, I don't recall. But I want to do these disclosures. Sean Hannity is a friend of mine. Not a close friend, not a go to lunch friend, but a buddy. I see him around. Mark Levin is an old and dear friend of mine, a go to lunch buddy. I was at Justice with him a long time ago. But lots of people at CNN are my friends. You know, Jeff Zucker is a friend. He's a big brain. Andy Lack is a friend. He's a big
Yeah.
brain. I don't know any Fox execs at all. And I never met Roger Ailes. I just want to get all my disclosures out of the way. I've got friends in the GOP Senate. My son works for the Trump administration. I've got Senate Democratic friends. Do any of that matter when you sit down with someone to do a talk about your book?
Maybe on the margins, but I feel like everybody has connections in different ways. And when I'm interviewing sources for my book, lots of people have lots of different, really interesting relationships, right? Like for example, Anthony Scaramucci, Sean Hannity. Turns out they're pretty close friends. They've had to put that friendship aside for a little while, but there are some amazing, interesting, complicated relationships in the media world, and I think you're right, Hugh. As long as everybody knows about them, as long as we talk about that openly, then it all works.
The funniest line in Hoax is about the mooch, by the way.
Oh, what
I'm
is
going to I'm going to recall this from memory. He was brought in to fix the leaks, which he tried mostly to do by yelling at the pipes. Is that
Oh, I
a
do
good?
have that line. Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you for actually reading the book.
oh,
I'm quite
I've
impressed.
read the book. I
But
always
I
read the book.
assume that you disagree with every chapter.
No, in fact, I'll tell you that at the beginning, what I agree with the most. I think the most valuable part of Hoax is that behind every programming decision, there is a larger business decision. The Murdoch's decisions on O'Reilly and on everything were driven by the acquisition of Sky News and later by the Disney deal. And I think Hoax brings this. I didn't know that, Brian. I didn't know about the dynamics of the Murdoch family. I really don't care about that kind of stuff, but that's in Hoax, right? That
Yeah, look, I
it
think the Bill O'Reilly example is really interesting. Bill O'Reilly had these secret settlements with women who had accused him of misconduct. He has always said he's innocent. And these stories came out in the New York Times. Hey, look, the New York Times, the big bombshell story. And the Murdochs were just tired of all the bad press. They were tired of all the headlines about Fox and misconduct. And so they cut him loose. And I do think it had a lot to do with the Sky deal. They were trying to buy this giant broadcaster in Great Britain. And the British regulators were starting to look at the O'Reilly story very skeptically. So you're right. There's always these different chess pieces, and sometimes if you're a star or a commentator on a network, you don't know that you're part of a larger chess game.
that and we're going to come back to that. I think that is the overriding takeaway is that behind every programming decision is actually a corporation looking after the best interest of its shareholders and its CEO and perhaps the head of programming. Let me ask you though, my very first question has nothing to do with the media. You drop a detail into the book which I found fascinating. You lost your father at a young age when he was coaching your brother's little league team. How old were you, Brian?
Yeah, I was 15 years old. It was 2001. It was a week after George W. Bush's inauguration. So I always hold on to the fact that he brought me to DC for the inauguration, because that was my last memory with him.
Well, I got to tell you, I want to give a shout out to Mrs. Stelter because I think she allowed you to work through your grief by indulging your TV news habit and
She,
running up ridiculous bills in the days of dial up. Is Mrs. Stelter still with us?
you're absolutely right. My mom is still with us, and you're right about that. And I, it's funny to hear you say that, Hugh, because I've been my dad's been hasn't been alive. He's passed away so long ago now. I haven't had him for almost 20 years. But I look back and I think everything in my life traces back to his death. because the school took care of me. My mom held me close, allowed me to indulge my passions and get online and start making these websites. It is interesting how you can sometimes.
Well, we're breaking up on the feed there, Brian. Have you got
Oh
terrible?
wow.
There we go. It's interesting.
Oh
You go ahead. You're back.
no, I can. I was gonna say I can call back on my phone. It is just amazing how everything in your life can be traced back to an event like that. To a shocking, awful event, but you try to figure out what the silver lining is. And for me, the silver lining was, I everything in my life started from that moment. Yeah.
And I think that is it's a kind of a dropped in intro to Brian Stelter. I want my audience to know that.
Thank.
Now, I got to ask the question my audience needs to know. Do you have in your contract a non-disparagement clause? Because I don't want to ask you to criticize or comment on CNN if you're going to violate your contract by doing so.
I think I criticize CNN and comment on CNN all the time. So
Okay, great, great.
let's go for it. What do you
Let's
got?
go for it. Well, I think Hoax is one half of one third of a book that needs to be written about cable news, meaning it's the bad half of Fox, not the good half of Fox. And MSNBC and CNN are not in it hardly at all. But
Right.
that if someone writes The Powers That Be, Halberstrom's famous book about the networks and the big media from 3 decades ago, they have to cover all three networks. You made a choice not to cover my network, MSNBC, or your network, CNN. Why is that?
I think the story of Fox is a very different story. I think the story of Fox and Trump is a isolated, separate story. It's really less about television and more about the president being informed or misinformed by this media outlet. I agree with you, though, that somebody could do a cable news wars book. I just think that's a different story than the Trump Fox story.
Okay, but there's a lot of the good side of Fox, which you do mention, but you kind of skip away from. Let's start with the very best. I think the best in cable news is Brett Baer doing Special Report. I think after that is Chuck Todd doing Meet the Press Daily, and after that, I think Jake Tapper doing The Lead. I don't watch nighttime opinion shows, but do you agree or disagree that the opinion shows on CNN are just like the opinion shows on Fox?
Of course, they're not like the opinion shows on Fox. And if you watched the opinion shows, first of all, you need to watch prime time on Fox. It is poisonous. It is extremist rhetoric. And that's why we should pay attention to it. It's important to know what 4, 5, 6 million people are hearing every night because it's so extreme and so radical, anti Democrat, anti Biden. That is not the same as what CNN or MSNBC is doing. It's just not. Here's my favorite example, Hugh. MSNBC, Rachel Maddow at 9 p.m. She's always saying, buy a local newspaper, support local news, support a healthy media ecosystem. Sean Hannity says journalism is dead. He tells you not to trust anything else. I think there's just a gigantic difference between what Fox is doing in prime time and the other networks.
Let me queue up for you. I'm not going to go through thousands of clips with you on CNN where I
Ah,
can disagree, but I'm going to play you Don Lemon from last week. Here's Don.
Everybody sticks
We're
with
going to
their
have to
team.
blow up the entire system. And you know what we're going to have to do?
No, I don't know
You
about
know what
that.
we're going to? Yes,
Yeah.
what you're going to have to do?
You just got to vote.
Honestly, from what your closing argument is, you're going to have to get rid of the Electoral College. Because the people,
I don't see it.
because the minority in this country decides who the judges are and they decide who the president is.
But you need a constitutional amendment to do that.
And if Joe Biden wins, Democrats can stack the courts and they can do that amendment and they can get it passed.
Well, you
Brian
that's the
Stelter,
vote in the
blow up
Congress
the
in
whole
three-
system, stack the courts, amend the Constitution. That's radical. That's Don.
that's one person's view of a situation. Why is that? Why do you think that's why do you think that's shocking or surprising?
Because Don is, do you think Don is an opinion host or a news host?
Don Lemon is a news anchor who has a point of view and talks about his point of view. Because sometimes the best way to get through the news and all the noise is to explain what's happening in our own words.
How can you contrast Don and Sean and say they're any different? Don's just a lefty and Sean's a righty. That's all.
Well, again, here's another example. Laura Ingraham was at the White House on Saturday, hanging out during the Supreme Court announcement. Obviously, that's her right. She used to be a clerk in the Supreme Court. She has an opinion show on Fox. But you would never see Don Lemon hanging out at the White House for a Supreme Court announcement. Listen, if that happens someday, I'll come back on and eat my words. That's not going to happen. CNN is a different beast than Fox News.
And now, Brian, I really don't care who goes to the White House. I've never been invited to a President Trump event, so I wouldn't know. But Laura is a Supreme Court clerk and may know Judge Barrett. May. I don't know what year she was there. It's roughly the same time frame. But I don't know that that matters. I'm making the argument that I hear a lot of left-wing clips from CNN and MSNBC, my own network, right? My own network.
You should watch the channel. Don't watch the channel on Twitter. Watch the channel.
No, I watch MSNBC when I do debate prep, when I have to do the debate show tomorrow night. MSNBC is Fox, is CNN. My premise is it's all the same. None of it, by the way, is news. None of it is news. It's all infotainment.
First of all, it's offensive and really nasty to say it's not news. There are hardworking journalists at CNN and MSNBC and at Fox. So I hope you'll take that back. Of course it's news. Of course it's news.
Brian, we have a disagreement. It's infotainment. News is this show talking to you.
Killing themselves out there, trying so hard to get to what the news is, what the truth is. And sometimes they go out to hurricanes and war zones.
Oh, wait. We're talking about different things. We're talking about prime time. I'm not talking about journalists who are working.
Prime time. There's a lot of news in prime time. This is the problem with watching cable news via social media. Look at what Rachel Maddow does, interviewing people for 20, 30 minutes. That's news.
Does she interview anyone that is of a similar intellect? She's a Rhodes Scholar, obviously. Have you ever seen her interview anyone of a similar intellect, of an opposite point of view, Brian?
I can't think of a recent example, no. But I think that would be a good thing. I'm with you on the, we need to have more of that. But I'm thinking to myself, Tucker Carlson does interview newsmakers. That is a version of news.
Again, this is just definitional, but tell me who on CNN of your contributors is a Trump supporter?
Rick Santorum was on last night, and he'll be on again during the debates.
Okay, anybody else?
Scott Jennings, I think, is going to be on tomorrow night as well. I'm just trying to think of who's going to be on tomorrow night.
I don't know who Scott Jennings is. I honestly don't.
Scott Jennings is another. Well, then you should watch more CNN, Hugh.
No, I just don't. I don't think it's news. I mean, I read the Trump tax article today because Michael Shear will give me 4,000 words, and I can read a lot faster than I can watch. Let's go back to Hoax. All right, let's go back to Hoax because I don't have any animus to anyone. Everybody, it's like, to me, it's all players on the same team. It's like professional sports. It's like baseball. It's a business.
But when you say that, when you blur it all together, that's what creates this sense of, well, everybody's bad. Everybody does it. I don't think that's true.
Not everybody is bad. Everybody's in a business, Brian. Everybody's trying to get ratings. You're breaking up again.
Obsession at CNN.
There is a ratings obsession everywhere that I've been. I have contributed to Fox. Of course, I worked alongside of CNN for Salem during 4 debates and 1,000 hits in 2016. I work for NBC now. Isn't everybody ratings obsessed?
The ratings are important, no doubt. I'm not going to deny the ratings are not important. What I found from dozens and dozens of sources at Fox was that this obsession with ratings is so much more intense. But maybe that's because they've been winning. They've been number one for 18 years. I don't feel that same pressure personally as a CNN anchor the way that I heard about it at Fox.
Okay, I am not going to trash anyone at any network about obsession of ratings. I just think they're all like. Let me go to the bottom line. My problem with Hoax is that we know the end of some stories that you criticize Fox for their coverage of. We know the end of the Mueller report, right? There was no collusion, correct?
I'm not going to play a game about a word that is irrelevant to the question at hand. There's still a lot we don't know about the president's ties with Russia, period.
But Brian, that begs the question. Your criticism of Hoax is a lot of it is based in the coverage of the Mueller investigation and how they downplayed it and called it a hoax. It turns out there was no collusion, and it turns out we know this week, you couldn't have known it during writing of Hoax, that the primary subsource of the Steele dossier is probably a Russian agent, correct?
I think there's a fantasy land that Fox promotes about what you're describing, about the Steele dossier and all of that, that distracts from the key questions about Trump's ties with Russia. We now know from the New York Times, hundreds of $millions of loans. Who the president owes money to? We need to know. You deserve to know that, Hugh.
That's a deflection. The primary subsource of the dossier was revealed last week to be a Russian agent investigated by the Obama Department of Justice in 2009 and 10. The dossier is discredited. There was no collusion. These are factual matters. That's my problem with Hoax.
I'm a media reporter, and I'm not a Steele dossier reporter. What I know is that when you use the word hoax over and over again, the way the president has, it's dangerous and poisonous because it makes people think there's nothing real and nothing true anymore. And that's what I think the problem is.
Will you at least agree with me that the primary subsource of the dossier has been revealed to be a Russian agent?
I literally do not know because I'm a media
Okay,
reporter. I
that's
hate
fine.
to disappoint you.
All right.
I don't cover the dossier. I don't really
I
care
think
about
you
the
I
dossier.
think you skipped over Kavanaugh very quickly. There is not
Yeah.
one mention of Michael Avenatti in your book Hoax. Is that
Why would I mention
intentional on your
Michael
part?
Avenatti? He's irrelevant.
He was part of the people who slimed Justice Kavanaugh, and he in fact propagated a hoax that was repeated on many networks.
My book is about Fox and Trump and why Trump is obsessed with Fox and why he gets misinformation from Fox. And Avenatti wasn't really on Fox much, was he?
Yes, he was. Not much, not as much as CNN. He was on
Right.
CNN a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah, he was on. Was he on your show?
of course he was. But if the president was watching CNN more, if he was watching higher quality content, he would get misinformed less often. And then that's the crux of the problem. That's why they're not all the same.
But
There
if he
are
had been
much
watching
better.
your show during Kavanaugh, he would have heard Avenatti say about his nominee completely false things.
I don't think I booked Avenatti during Kavanaugh, and I don't think that's true. But the difference, here's the thing: they're not all the same. All these channels are not the same. If the president was watching PBS NewsHour or only watching Brett Baer's show, he would be better informed. But instead, he watches these hardcore far right talk shows that misinform him. That's the crux of my argument.
Oh, I do. I get your argument. In fact, let's go to a part of you quote Donald Trump saying about the special counsel appointment, it being the end of his presidency, and I'm blanked, which I can't say. It's what Bill Maher said about Amy
Yeah.
Coney Barrett. And
Right.
then you said, but he wasn't blanked because he, quote, had Hannity in the Fox base. Now, Brian, that's kind of silly, isn't it? Because he wasn't effed because the special counsel spent endless amounts of money and thousands of millions of dollars in prosecutorial time and found no collusion. That's why it wasn't the end of his presidency, not because of Fox News.
The word collusion was never in the charging documents, so it's an irrelevant conversation to talk about collusion. The special counsel found a lot of evidence. Thankfully, it took way too long. I wish we'd received that evidence a lot sooner. And now there's follow-ups, and there's all these books that people can read if they are still interested in the issue. Peter Strzok's Compromised and all the rest.
And Brian York's Obsession, which is I think the best book on it. It's in this stack of books. My point being, though, it wasn't Fox News that saved Donald Trump from the special counsels because the special counsel could find nothing after 2.5 years of endless effort.
Okay, that's an interesting view. I think they found an extraordinary amount, and that is what it is.
All right, so let's go to fairness to you. I got to say this very carefully. I'm not trying to trap you, but I am trying to. You said scrutiny makes people stronger, right?
Does absolutely.
That's page 258. Scrutiny makes people stronger. So I was reading along about Roger Ailes, whom I never met, even though he's from Warren, Ohio. And you write, Ailes was scheduled to meet with billionaire tech mogul and Trump backer Peter Thiel about a possible network venture in mid-May. And then you go on to describe that Ailes fell over and ultimately died. Well, I know Peter. So I wrote him an email as I was reading the book yesterday, and I asked him, is this true? And Peter wrote back, no, not at all. I met Ailes once somewhere around 26, and I hadn't spoken to him since. It's kind of bewildering, he wrote back, how these kinds of fake stories get generated. I think this one somehow predated Stelter, but I've generally given up even trying to figure out exactly who gets things wrong and who exaggerates various connections. So you got something wrong. That's not the end of the world. But does it change the way I should view the rest of Hoax?
Well, you're saying Peter Thiel is saying it's wrong. That's different than it being wrong. There was a BuzzFeed story in January 2018 titled "Peter Thiel is exploring the creation of a conservative channel, possibly with Roger Ailes." Maybe Peter Thiel was not doing that, and I should have asked you for his email address because I couldn't find a way to contact him. But let me just ask you this, Hugh. If there's a story out there for 3 years about you and you don't say anything, isn't that strange? I'm not trying to blame Peter Thiel, but I think it's weird that he would just let those stories go out there for years.
I disagree with that because I don't think you can chase everything, especially if you're Thiel or you're Brian Stelter or you're Hewitt. You can't chase everything. But I think Brian Stelter is writing a book about what happens to Roger Ailes and when he dies, that he's waiting to start a conservative network because he's bitter and in exile, ought to have found a way to ask Peter. And obviously, Peter's pretty well plugged in. I got to him yesterday in 1 hour.
It looks like it originated with Michael Wolff in the book Fire and Fury. That was before the BuzzFeed story. It was Michael Wolff who said Ailes was about to meet with Teal. What's interesting about Michael Wolff is he was very close with Roger and Elizabeth, Roger's widow. So presumably it came from the Ailes side, not from the Teal side. When I was going through this, I tried to find Teal's info to ask him and couldn't. So I should have asked you to get his contact information. But I take your point. And there are two other mistakes that I know about in the hardcover that I'm going to change for the paperback. I got a date wrong and I got a ratings figure wrong. So
don't worry. In my book on Mitt Romney, I started the Korea War 2 years wrong. So at the very first page, I got the start of the Korea War because fact checkers can't check dates and names.
It's funny though. I was so relieved when I went through the book when it was finally printed and I only found 2 of the mistakes that I know about. Because when you write a 300-page book, you're reading it dreading what you're going to find in the final version. But to answer your question, no. Finding errors actually should make people more confident in the entirety of something because it shows that there's an accountability and a when we're talking about it, I think it shows an openness. Okay, then let's go out and figure out what went wrong. But in terms of more broadly, I think when journalists make corrections or make admissions, I think that strengthens journalism.
Let's talk a little bit about your coverage of Fox's coverage of the pandemic, which is not excellent, but no network and no broadcaster except yours truly got it right. I covered the virus in December and January endlessly. I got Robert O'Brien on this show in January to say it was deadly and dangerous. No one would listen to me. How can you single out Fox when everybody missed a story that I, just a little humble radio host with 300 affiliates, was telling everybody every day was going to kill millions of people? That's an exaggeration.
There's a lot of responsibility, a lot of blame to go around, mayors and governors, et cetera. But Fox has the biggest platform, so it should be scrutinized. Fox has the biggest audience on cable. It has a direct line to the president. The president's misinformed by the network all the time, so it deserves attention. I hear from Fox fans who say, "Why do you cover Fox?" Well, it's bigger than a network. It's the most important media company in the country, and I would argue it's more than a media company, Hugh. I would argue it's like right next to the GOP as its own institution in American life.
But the president calls my network an arm of the DNC. He calls your network fake news.
But you should be pissed about that, Hugh.
I'm not. It's entertainment. I think it's all entertainment. Look, I've been in this business for 30 years. I've been doing this for 30 years. It's all entertainment. Everybody is the same. Brian, you need ratings. I need ratings. We got to sell soap. We're all the same, except for the journalists on the front line, like John Fisher Burns.
That's not what I wake up thinking about. I think about, I have an hour on TV. How am I going to use it really well and get as much information as I can? I am not thinking about the ratings.
But I want you to think about what I try and do. But I get 3 hours a day, 15 hours a week, is bring everybody's point of view and bring every fact that matters. So you should know that the primary subsource of the dossier is a Russian agent. And the fact that you don't is why people don't trust CNN, because they don't know that you guys ever look on the other side of a story.
I read as much as I can, but there are much bigger priorities in this country right now, frankly, than a 4-year-old dossier. I understand
Brian,
it's part of the right-wing fantasy land.
No, Brian, hear me on this. Okay. Really do hear me. I spent 6 years in the Department of Justice, the White House counsel's office, got confirmed by the Senate. The idea that a handful of FBI and other people, perhaps in the intelligence community, were trying to take down a president using an illegal attack upon his election is perhaps the most scandalous effort I've ever seen to undermine a president at the beginning of his presidency ever in American history. And you're not interested in that.
I'm interested in the overall subject, but I'm also interested in look, the Comey rule is on Showtime last night and tomorrow. I haven't watched it. I'm behind on a bunch of things. But that paints a very different picture than what you said, right? That paints a picture of an FBI terrified that the president was possibly compromised by Russia. And you don't seem to have your door open to that possibility.
Oh, I've read everything. And I happen to believe quite firmly Jim Comey was out of his mind. I've read everything. I read it all. I want to give you the last moment. Yesterday, you said this on Fox. On CNN. I want to play the Brian audio from yesterday. Dwayne, you got it? The Brian audio about Chris Wallace?
Nobody. I know what I said.
What you said. You said he was tainted by Fox.
Respected journalist, but does he have the Fox taint on him?
Yeah, now, Brian, I looked it up. The first time I could find the word Fox taint was a Jennifer Rubin column. I've never seen it used before except in Hoax. I think it's really a terrible thing to say about all those hardworking journalists, especially the ones who go into war zones. I don't believe there's a Fox taint on Chris Wallace. Do you really believe there is?
I didn't say there was. I asked my guests if there was, and all of my guests defended Chris Wallace. I do think there's a lot of liberals in this country who look at it and say, why does a Fox guy have a debate? But I think he is the right Fox guy to have a debate. And, I was asking one of his friends over the weekend, I said, is this a Fox debate? They said, no, it's a Chris Wallace debate. That's a big difference. And I think
Well,
we're going to see that tomorrow night.
but let's say on this Fox tape, I know Byron York. I know Guy Benson. I went to Guy Benson's wedding with Megyn Kelly sitting across from me. I know these people. They have no taint on them. They're great journalists. There is no such thing as a Fox taint.
There absolutely is on some people. A lot of friendships have been ruined in the Trump era. People that used to be friends with Bret
Oh, that's
Baier
true.
don't talk to him now. They don't talk to him now. They think he's complicit in a propaganda machine.
Do
The
you believe
propaganda
that? Brett
machine
is the
feels
best
like
journalist
Fox.
on TV. Brett is the best anchor on TV. Do you agree with me on that?
Bret Baier is a solid news anchor, but his show also leans to the right. And it's symbolic of how all the shows on Fox have become Trumpier over time. I know that some people may disagree with me, but I make the case in Hoax.
You do. And Hoax is a must read. You got to go. It's 9 o'clock. It's a hard out. Come back, Brian Stelter. It's good to talk.